Hello there, and welcome to the 24 Gauge Podcast. We are your hosts,
Dave,
and Julia Grant.
a couple of nurses who are also a couple.
We are Canadian RNs with 25 years of shared acute care experience who have built professional careers and a life together. Join us each episode as we have conversations about the real, the introspective, the deep, and the dorky of living life as a nurse.
And welcome to another episode of the 24 Gauge Podcast.
I'm not sure I'm sold on that intro music yet, but I guess we'll work on that.
It was what was preloaded on the recorder.
It was the path of least resistance.
Hold on, I need some Phil and Sebastian coffee to get
Oh my goodness,
started.
name dropping already, are we? All right, well, Dave's sipping away at his coffee there. I figured we should probably actually explain the name of our podcast since several people, i.e., two of our 3 subscribers,
Yay!
have asked us where the name comes from. So allow us to explain for both nurses and non-nurses alike. IVs, like the needles that you use to introduce the cannulas into your veins to give fluids into your venous system.
I swear to God, we are trained professionals. But how often do you have to actually explain your job?
Yeah, exactly. Anyways, so IV cannulas, that is the little things you stick in your arm to give you fluids, are assigned a number based on their size, except that the number they're given is inversely related to the size, which is really weird, but whatever. Don't get me started on that. There's a whole history that involves the British steel industry or something like that. But anyways, in the hospital...
Because, of course, Julia would know this.
Well, a little bit of it. I'm sure I heard it on somebody else's podcast at some point. Anyways, in the hospital, we use IVs that are generally gauges 14 through 26. Now, if you were to, 14 through 26, with 14 being the largest needle and 26 being the smallest. Now, if you were to walk into any Emerge today, I wouldn't recommend it unless you absolutely need to, but an Emerge nurse who needed to give you fluids would probably immediately pop a 20 gauge IV into your ACF, which is the inside of your elbow. It's a big needle into a big vein, give you lots of fluids really quickly.
It's not quite a garden hose size, but it's close.
But it's close. Now, if you were to be admitted to a medical floor and someone was starting an IV on you there, you might get a 20 or you might get a 22 gauge, which is a slightly smaller but also very useful needle for more long-term fluids over a matter of days. A 24 gauge IV is usually reserved for kind of a last resort in adults where people have really small veins. It's hard to get IV access on them, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not usually the first choice for IV therapy in the hospital. However, in oncology, our standard is actually to put 24 gauge IVs onto our patients for chemotherapy. And the reason being is that a lot of chemotherapy agents are quite caustic to your veins. They're known as vesicants, or at the very least, irritants. And so what we want when we're giving that to you through an IV is for that IV to be very small, going into a nice big fat juicy vein so that those drugs mix with a lot of blood the minute they're in your body to reduce irritation on your veins. So it's a bit of an odd choice for an IV throughout most of medicine, but it makes sense in oncology. And maybe that's an analogy for us. It's a bit of an odd choice to be married and working, but it works for us. Married and working together, I should say.
How much thought did you give to that being an analogy?
That kind of just rolled off my tongue earlier today, and I was like, well, I guess I'll use that.
Yeah, sure. It sounds great.
So there you go. That's where it comes from. IV sizes for giving chemotherapy, which makes sense because we're both oncology nurses.
So then the only thing that comes up is then on the socials and Spotify and stuff is we've written it the 24, like the number 24G, which is how you would write gauge. But then we're also
the accepted abbreviation for gauge in our industry.
But then we're also adding it in sometimes in like brackets, the age part of gauge, and then sometimes we're writing it out. So still trying to figure out how best to get across it so that people can search for it. Because if you tried to write 24 gauge podcast, it might not show up quite yet.
So
anyways, there'll be links in the show notes for all of this stuff
for all
that you
of
can
this.
Just go to.
So we are the 24 gauge podcast, but it's spelled 24G podcast. So there you go.
Not to be confused with this other podcast that's from Apartment 24G in Milan, but they haven't done anything in a year and a half, so it's fine.
Oh, okay. So also, this name was not taken. The domain name was free. That also played into our choice of name selection for our podcast. So there you have it. There is our explanation. So What are we talking about today, Dave Grant?
I can't remember.
I thought we had decided that we are going to talk about living life with a nurse and what it's actually like
Oh yeah.
having a nurse as a partner, what that means.
Well, so we've been married for eight
Had to think
years
about that.
now, together for
Was-
nine,
yes, very good. Well, yeah,
9-ish. Yeah,
like
9.
9.5, and we've been married for just
Yeah,
over 8.
yeah. And
Yes, do the math. We got engaged and married fairly quickly.
we're still trying to figure it out.
We are, but I think I don't know. I think that there are some what's the word I'm looking for? Idiosyncrasies. That's maybe not the right word. There's some
It's
things
good
that are
enough word.
very unique about living with another nurse or just living with a nurse in general. And there's
Yeah.
a lot of memes about it out on the internet. So, we're going to address some of those today and whether they are true or not and what that looks like in our relationship.
Well, let's right off the top of the bat, let's talk about just being two nurses working full time. And working full time, except for this year right now, because you're PCC, but working shift work.
Yes.
So pre pandemic, which is also pre toddler,
For us, yes.
it wasn't too bad. There were times that you would go a couple of days without really seeing each other, other than like at bedtime, like in the evening or something.
Mhm.
Or maybe a little bit in the morning if one was on nights. But it also gave you a lot of time to kind of do your own thing, see your own friends, pursue your own hobbies, and then when we had time off together, we would try to maximize those days for each other.
Yeah, and I think that's true for anyone who lives with a shift worker, whether or not you are also a shift worker yourself, is that if you're living with a shift worker and someone who's going to be doing days and nights or combinations thereof and stuff, there's going to be built in time apart in your schedule.
Hmm.
And this can be really hard when you, like for us, sometimes we'll be shifts in the night. We won't see each other except at shift change, like at shift change handoff report for 5 minutes while one's coming and going for like 72 hours.
Yeah,
We won't actually be in the physically in the same space. And there will be times where, we might be completely opposite, which means we don't have days off together for
hmm,
weeks at a time, like a full day off. And so I think like you need to recognize if you're living with someone who does shift work, but particularly a nurse, you're going to have to embrace those bits of downtime apart for the times that you'll do stuff for yourself, that you will, yeah, like Dave said, you'll see your own friends that maybe you don't share as a couple, or you'll pursue your own hobbies that you wouldn't necessarily do together. Do the things that you wouldn't do together when you have that built in time apart, so that when you do have time together, you're really prioritizing life as a couple.
yeah, and like like we've been lucky enough in our unit. It's such a small unit. Um, we've had a number of different schedules, and in fact, I've built the last couple of schedules,
Like he means master rotations.
and then we've been able to kind of like beg our colleagues to let us choose certain lines so that we maximize us being off together but not working together. Like we like working together, but when we say working together, we actually work really hard to not actually be on the same shift together,
Yeah.
except
Especially now
in
that we have a
quote
child.
except quote unquote at the moment because Julia is covering the PCC line for a couple of months, which is a whole different thing,
Just means I'm the like that charge nurse, head nurse on the unit,
and just day shift. So
and just day
it's a
shifts.
little harder to do, but we've actually tried really hard to not work together on the floor. So we work on the same floor, but we don't actually work together on the floor.
We don't share shifts all the time. Like if we're in our normal master rotation, which like we said is not the case right now, but shortly again will be, we work about 20 shifts a year together, I'd say, right? That's our
Yeah,
actual
about 20
overlap.
shifts.
And now that we have a child, we try and take those days off. One of us will take those days off as vacation
Hmm.
so that someone's always home with our kid, which is a pretty great thing about our schedules. Actually, we both work full time and we don't need full time daycare
There's a parent home
pretty much all the
pretty
time.
much 365 days a year.
Yeah.
There are still days that we need grandma downstairs to babysit and stuff because one of us will be on days, one of us will be on nights.
Got to sleep during the day.
But overnight there's always a parent home to watch Ethan.
Mm-hmm.
And usually like for dinners and stuff there's also somebody home, so Ethan gets a lot of like parent time every single day. He's not getting shipped off to daycare and stuff, which is fine. I'm just glad that we haven't had to spend the money to do that.
Hmm. And to be clear, again, it's not that we don't like actually being on the same shift as each other. I just, especially with family life as it is now, it really works out conveniently for us if we are not on the same shift together with having a small child at home.
And it probably has been better for our colleagues, maybe that
Maybe,
we're not like I
I
don't know,
mean, no
like
one gives us negative feedback, but maybe it is easier to not have to like work with us as a married couple. And I don't
yeah, like I know that there
know.
have been times in the past where like one of us will be off and the other one will call in sick, and there's been like scuttlebutt that to the managers that we've called in sick so that we could go do something with our significant other, which so we've actually had to be really careful about that. Like, how do we post on Instagram when one is home and one's supposed to be home, but the other is sick? Like, what do we do and stuff just to, not have anything bad thought about
You
us.
you make it sound like this is something we do regularly that we have to watch our Instagram posts. Number one, we don't regularly post on Instagram
Not anymore,
anymore,
no.
honestly. And number two, we're not regularly calling in sick to spend time to each other. But say someone is scheduled off and someone legitimately
By not regularly, Julia means we don't.
we don't at all.
It's
But
just that perception, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
we
yeah.
and that's the thing that our employers tried to make sure that we're protected with the extra rules that we have and whatnot, that the perception isn't that we're doing things or that we're doing everything by the book.
Yeah.
So it's
Which we both care a lot about.
yeah.
Yeah.
But
Like I
you
never want my integrity questioned at work because I work with you.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. But at the same time, you work with, like, especially on a small unit like us, you work with the same people and you see them more than you see your own family sometimes, and you're working at 3 in the morning and stuff, and things just get talked about and whatnot.
Yeah.
Which is it's fine.
Hmm.
I don't think it's caused too much hardship for us or too much awkwardness for our colleagues. I don't think nobody's ever said anything, and we have some pretty good friends at work who I think would have told us.
Well, and again, I think, like I said on our last episode, I, I personally think that the fact that there's still people figuring out that we're married
Yeah.
now, 8 years into our relationship, says that we're pretty clearly professional if we're sharing the workplace together.
Hmm.
So I'm gonna segue that right into one of those like meme things about nursing that's out there all over the internet. To comment whether this is true or not. So shift working, especially as a nurse, means you never get to have holidays or etc. Like birthdays, special events, and stuff with your family. True or not true?
True.
I wouldn't say it's
Not absolute,
yeah.
but it's true. You have to, if you try to have every holiday, every long weekend, every birthday, every anniversary off,
Mm-hmm.
you'll either one use up all your vacation time just doing that,
Yep.
or you'll burn yourself out. And on the case of such a small unit like this, you'll just always be asking for swaps.
Yeah. And in that case you end up just throwing off the rhythm of your schedule, and that in and of itself gets quite exhausting as well.
That's hard to do.
I think you have to, at the beginning of your career, if you're going to be working shift work, you have to bargain with yourself and figure out what is going to be okay with you in terms of how much you're going to miss, and what are the things that are the absolute priority for you to actually be around for.
Hmm.
And you're going to have to let some things go. And I really appreciate this analogy. Now I'm going to forget who first made it, but they talked about in life, you have, priorities and responsibilities and relationships and stuff that are within your sphere of like what you spend your time and energy on. And some of those things you can picture as glass balls and some are plastic. And the plastic ones, if you happen to drop them, they bounce, they don't break. You can pick them up again at another point. But those glass balls,
Brene Brown, I think.
Brene Brown,
I think so.
I mean, the woman says so many wonderful things. So we'll possibly chalk it up to her. But,
Yeah.
the glass balls are the ones you have to be really careful about. Because if you drop that, it shatters. You can't just pick that right back up, right? So you need to decide at the beginning of your career what's glass and what's plastic. And sometimes you decide that for yourself, and sometimes that's kind of dictated for you, depending on your circumstances. But I think that also comes in terms of special events, holidays, birthdays, etc. Which ones are the glass balls that you're just not going to drop, and whatever happens, you're always going to make that work, and which are the ones that are plastic and they can get dropped every other year or every third year, or you just find a way to really celebrate those things not on the designated day. Like, case in
Mhm.
point, Dave and I happened to get married on what ended up being a long weekend in our province. And it wasn't our choice necessarily to get married then, but my mother owns a catering company. So she had very limited time slots available.
And my parents lived up
And
north.
his parents lived way up north and had a very, very narrow time window in terms of which they could actually physically travel down to the south of Canada. And when we mean up north, I mean wave at Greenland north. So we were we were very limited in when we could pick when to have a wedding that our families could be at. But now we are stuck with an anniversary that always falls in the middle of summer with a long weekend. So and the fact that we're both shift workers, when do we ever actually get our wedding anniversary
Yeah.
off together? So we've just made it a priority over the years to celebrate it at some point, even if it never falls on that actual day. And I think
Yeah.
that's true for a lot of other things in our lives too, that, you know, it's very rare that we both get Christmas off.
Mhm.
Like this year is a very rare
Yeah, we
circumstance.
actually
We,
have both
we
Christmas Eve
both
and
have
Christmas
Christmas
off.
Eve and Christmas
Yeah.
off. That's a shocker for me.
Yeah.
What are we going to do with all that time
I
together?
I I wonder if you were in your actual line, if you would be working them.
I would have had Christmas off this year, but
Mhm.
not New Year's Eve.
Mm.
So sometimes that works out and that's lucky and you get the chance to do the holidays on the actual days. But you know what? If you're living with a nurse or someone else who does shift work and it doesn't fall that way, then just, adjust the expectation and be okay with celebrating on a different day maybe if it's important to you.
Now, I do wanna kinda, like, put the caveat in that it's fluid and those glass balls that Julia was talking about, those will evolve as you grow older and,
They will
as your
change over time.
career moves on and stuff like that. When you're 20, your priorities, well, when you're in your 20s, sorry, you'd have to be really good to be a nurse at 20, I guess.
Be
But
a child
when you're
genius.
in your 20s, your priorities are way different.
Hmm.
And so we're not
Usually.
saying don't make all the switches and try to get to all the holidays and whatnot. But over time, it becomes harder and harder to try to fit into the 9 to 5 school year type of schedule
Mm-hmm.
that we all grew up with. And just in our experience, nurses who try to fight and force that schedule onto their lives as shift workers tend to struggle more.
Yeah. So just take that as a word of advice from two nurses that have been doing this for 25 years. Don't burn yourself out trying to make it to every single family event.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you need to. I don't know if it's a part guilt. I mean, I know for us, there it was part guilt that we needed to be able to make sure we get to every family event. But you need to let yourself be free and and just let yourself relax and not feel like you have to force yourself into everything. You just can't. There's too much going on, and too many people work the 9 to 5 Monday to Friday life, and you don't have shift workers, and to try to shoehorn yourself into that is really hard.
And that's actually something that you had to help me with very much so at the beginning of my career because you'd already been nursing for several years and you've already had kind of had to learn this lesson a bit the hard way for yourself.
Hmm.
And we started dating just as like right at the beginning of my career. So I was just starting to work out what being a shift worker actually meant for my life, for my time and whatever all else. And you had to like with a lot of grace and a very firm hand often tell me don't try and do things on the day that you're coming off of night shifts. Don't try and like schedule yourself
Hmm.
full on the day that you're switching from days to nights. Because on our schedule, we normally rotate through 2 days, 2 nights, and then days off. Don't try and do something in between that day shift and your
Yeah.
first night shift. Don't cram that all full because you will burn yourself out.
Yeah. Like we were talking about in our last episode, our job is stressful enough. And
Mm-hmm.
then if you're burning the candle at both ends, because usually when you try to shoehorn your shift work life into a 9 to 5 life, it means no sleep.
Mm-hmm.
It means working on little sleep. And that's going to burn you out. It doesn't matter how old you are.
Yeah. You can be a 20 something and, try and run off of Red Bulls and you can do that for a period of time, but the body keeps score and eventually it catches up with you.
Hmm.
So, speaking of the body, we segue into another one of those nursing stereotypes that you see. Uh, do we, as nurses, in our day-to-day normal life, talk about bodily functions at inappropriate times, including the dinner table.
Hells yes.
Yes, it does come up. We do tell work stories at the dinner
It is
table.
absolutely hilarious when you're sitting around family Christmas dinner and you start talking about the worst bowel movement that somebody had at work. It's great.
I mean, try and have a little compassion for the people who get squeamish about things, but
No compassion at all. It's fun.
I also live in a house filled with boys. We have a son and a male dog, so I'm very like surrounded by a lot of male energy in this house. So like the poop stories are just the hit.
Well, sometimes me and Ethan, we just like yell poop and fart and make gross noises.
I mean, the kid is just not going to be able to be squeamish because he's going to have to grow up around all of this.
Yeah.
Because neither you nor I are squeamish about telling stories
No.
ever. Well, I will say, I will put a caveat on that and say, I can deal with all the grossest stories from work and like talk to my friends who are trauma nurses or, just people dealing with really gnarly things at work. I can hear about those stories or even see them in person and be fine. I can't deal with it on TV.
Mm.
I know that's so weird, but
That is a weird one.
that's come up a bunch in our relationship where I'm just like, oh, I can't handle this gratuitous violence or gore or something like that. Or even just stuff that's like, it's gratuitous, but it's slightly comical. Like, what movie were we watching the other day?
Bullet Train.
Yeah, Bullet Train, which is like, it feels like somewhere between what you said, Guy Ritchie and Quentin Tarantino, right? And I was just like, nope, something about this just doesn't.
I loved it.
Yeah.
I've watched it twice so far.
And I like an hour in, I'm like, not even, it was maybe 40 minutes in. I'm like, yeah, no, this isn't for me. So I don't know what that's about where I can't handle it on a screen, but in real life, I'm like, oh yeah, I got this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we'll talk about it at dinner. I can't watch it on the screen. Dave is fine either way.
I really like telling nursing stories that like will weird people out.
I feel like I wish I had more fun stories that where people get like the fun grossed out and they're like, one of those things where people are like, oh, I can't look away, but I still want to hear about it. I feel like I have less of those stories and more just kind of like of the tragic nature.
Yeah, you've had quite a few traumatic experiences.
Which we will get into it in a different episode. Let's not add that flavor to this one. But it is true. I think I've had a lot more like traumatic experiences in my career somehow than you have. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I've had way more codes.
True.
But you've had a lot more traumatic codes and stuff.
I have, yes. Yeah. Well, that'll be a different episode.
Yeah. we need to fortify ourselves with a bottle of wine for that one.
For something like that one, yeah. Oh, yeah, that was one more thing that we talked about when we talked about forming this podcast, having a drink of the day that we are consuming.
Normally we're going to be starting with a coffee from Phil and Sebastian's.
But today we are sipping on some holiday cider here.
It's lovely.
It's got some nice cinnamon, and I even threw cloves in it at the risk of offending your taste buds.
The cloves are fine as long as they don't get left in there, because if they get left in there, oh my God.
Well, I only realized halfway through your cup I hadn't started straining it, so I strained it after that. If there's a stray one in there, I apologize. Dave apparently had a traumatizing experience with cloves in ham as a child.
Yeah, they would get left in.
I don't know if your family ever did that, where they like score the top of the ham and then tuck cloves in there for flavor, but apparently Dave as a child got a piece that had a clove still stuck into it.
Not just once, but multiple times. And when you would bite into it,
Isn't that like a traditional remedy for like sore teeth or sore gums or something though? Like to like chew on cloves or rub cloves on it?
Oh, I don't know. That's ridiculous.
Okay, I happen to
Give
like
me
the flavor
whiskey
of cloves.
for that.
All right. Well, you got whiskey in there too today.
That's good.
Topped it off with Crown for you.
There you go.
You're welcome. All right. So here's another nursing meme, nursing stereotype that we kind of just touched upon. We drink a lot of coffee. So much coffee. How many pounds of coffee do you say we go through in a month? What do we order? Because we have a subscription.
They're not quite a pound.
The bags themselves.
They're just shy of a pound.
Mm-hmm.
And we also buy for our buddy Eric, so he gets a bag from us. And
yeah, but how many bags do we actually go through?
5.
Like
almost 5 pounds. I call it like 4.5 pounds of coffee a month.
A month. Oh, Well, that's not so bad. And that's only what we drink at home. That
Yeah.
doesn't include our workplace has like a Keurig and there's a Starbucks in the lobby. So there,
We don't think 4.5 pounds of coffee for two people is that bad.
I mean, we're
I
comparing it to
I don't
our
know.
other nursing
That's true. I don't know.
friends. So,
Is if you have if you know how much coffee you drink in a month, if you make coffee at home, put it down in the. I'm gonna have a Q&A in on the show notes. And let us know how much coffee you actually drink. That would
yeah,
be fun to know because
we can gauge our
I'm think
intake.
part of me is saying 4.5 pounds. That's about right because it's about I do a double shot in our espresso maker and I make about two of those a day. Julia does about 3 shots a day,
But they're all singles.
but yeah, singles. So, that's about 7 to 8 shots a day, sometimes up to 10 between the two of us.
Let's be
That
honest.
seems like a lot of
That's
coffee.
We're just caffeine buzzing all the time. We're going to do an episode later on about caffeine use and nursing as well, and like how to be smarter with your caffeine use, because there's a lot of good research out there about that. And I feel like as nurses, we need to be more conscious of our caffeine
Yeah,
intake. But you know what? Here's the thing, I just genuinely enjoy coffee. I'm not always
same.
going to it for the caffeine hit. I love the experience of having a cup of coffee in my hands and smelling it and drinking it and
Especially
just
when you
enjoying
have
it.
good coffee. And we're not
I've,
talking like been on the shelf for 2 months. It's
mm,
dry and old from
oily, ugh,
your grocery store. We're talking about good. It was
like fresh
roasted on
roasted
Monday. I have the bag on Friday
or
from San
earlier.
Sebastian's in Calgary.
Yeah.
Uh, and we're
Stop.
drinking really good roasted coffee.
Yeah. So, like, here's the thing. I think I've said this to you before too. I've definitely said this to some of my friends. Like, there are some days where I go to sleep at night wishing I could just skip sleeping so that it could be morning and I could have my cup of coffee again, because it's totally inappropriate to drink a cup of coffee right before bed.
Hmm.
I'm not a university student anymore.
And
So,
we found getting a bag of decaf a month was a waste because we wouldn't have it all the time. And
yeah,
then we just got stuck with this decaf
decaf
coffee,
at
and
the
we really
end.
wanted the good caffeinated
Yeah,
coffee.
that was a bummer.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing we stopped doing that. Death before decaf, right? Okay. So we talked about coffee, another stereotype about
Hmm.
nurses, that they drink a lot of alcohol.
Yeah, well, when you work a night shift, there is no problem with coming home, cracking open a tall boy, and chugging it on your Instagram stories at 8 in the morning.
Hey, now I only did that once.
Well, I wasn't actually thinking about you.
That was a long time
I was
ago.
thinking
I
about a
was still
friend
in
of
my 20s.
I was thinking about a friend of ours last Christmas for her Christmas Advent beer calendar. But sure,
Oh,
you
yeah,
too. There's
that's
nothing
true.
wrong with it because that's your night. You're going to
That's your 8
bed.
p.m.
Yeah, it's your 8 p.m.
Yeah.
So yeah, nurses do tend to drink a lot. When I first started, I remember when I first had my first patient die on me. I called my buddies up and said we're going to the bar that night. I wasn't traumatized, but I didn't know how to deal with it. I never dealt with a dead body before and stuff, and there's
Which is something
nothing
that we do at work. I think a lot of people are shocked to hear that we
quite
deal
often.
with dead bodies. We put them in body bags. We send them to the morgue. That's part of what we do. It's called postmortem care.
Yeah, and I didn't know how to cope with it. So I'm like, I just want to go
Because
and
no one
drink and have
deals with
fun
that in real
not
life.
to drink to like forget, but just to drink to not have to deal with it.
And I think,
I've learned better coping mechanisms as I've gone on, but
yeah, I think, I think that's true for a lot of us when we start nursing, because I mean, even you and I that went into nursing with a couple years of life experience out of high school, but
mhm,
there are a lot of people that do go straight from high school to university. They go straight through, get their degree, they start working, they're in the real world and they're dealing with all this kind of shit. Like
yeah,
this, like I just said, like most people never have to deal with a dead body in real life. Even like even policing and stuff, they're not necessarily dealing with dead bodies all the
hmm,
time. So like it's yeah, I think a lot of nurses start drinking a lot at the beginning of their career, or, maybe as times get worse and times go on, we start drinking more as they go along. I don't know. I think for me personally, as I have gotten more experienced and also gotten older and, tried to learn how to function better as a person and as a nurse, I have tried to drink less and less.
hmm,
And especially not after like traumatic or just like emotionally
yeah,
jarring type experiences. And I think I do intend at some point that we're going to do a podcast about, as a nurse having a trauma self-care plan for when
hmm,
you encounter these things at work. So we'll get more into the science of it at that point. But, there's a lot of research out there that says like you take depressants like alcohol after a really traumatizing, jarring, nervous system dysregulating experience, and it actually makes it a lot harder to get out of it in the long run. And I've started noticing that more and more
Yeah.
about myself. Whether I just notice it now more that I'm older, or I just wasn't conscious of it before, I'm not sure. But
Yeah, there's probably a combination of that.
mm,
I think when you're younger and you're dealing, I mean, I have no idea. This is just my opinion. Like I say, I wing it. I have no opinion. This is just an opinion of an old white dude. But I think when you're younger in our profession, you have the resilience of a young person to sort of deal with things. Uh, and then as you get older, you realize that some of those coping mechanisms weren't actually helping you. It was more your aging, the resilience nature that was, and you have to learn better ways to cope.
yeah, I think that's just part of the human experience. Hopefully, as we get more life experience, we learn how better to cope with life. One
Well,
can always hope.
and I think it's that's actually become more acute in our understanding during the pandemic because
Yeah,
everything is traumatic now. Everything is super stressful now.
yeah.
And if we try to cope the way that we coped before the pandemic, be drinking every day, I don't know, like it wouldn't be healthy. So we've had to actually like, I know for you and I, we've had to come face to face with how we cope, how we handle our mental health, how we talk to each other about mental health, how we support each other in it, and we've learned to do better coping mechanisms for when the days are tough.
I definitely think we spend less on alcohol now than we did, say, even 5 years ago in our careers. Like just overall, if I look at
Yeah,
our budget and our spending together.
yeah,
So
we spend more on coffee now.
there you go. We've transitioned. We're older. Okay, so here's another living with a nurse stereotype. We never go to the doctor unless we're dying. I mean, Dave just
I
never goes to the doctor.
I would say until the pandemic,
Yeah.
that was true. It be like I said, just said now we're trying to be more proactive about our mental
Mm-hmm.
health,
Yeah.
which means I have reached out to my doctor a bit more during the pandemic about that. But for just like injuries and like colds and that kind of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
no,
No.
we'll we'll just deal with it.
And also, living with a nurse does not mean that you're getting like 5-star care at home if you are sick. Well, maybe that's not true for you, because let's face it, you like bring me everything and then leave me alone. That's your style of care for me when you're sick.
Yeah,
Whereas I'm like, be close, stay near, don't go away. And Dave's
yeah,
like, no, that's I'm not doing that for you.
yeah,
You're not actually my patient. Oh, I'm
yeah,
sick. Give me snuggles.
yeah.
Nope.
You know what to do. Take care of yourself.
Yeah, exactly. You're on your own. I would say, hopefully, we're not going to be too much like that with our kid. But I guess we'll see what kind of,
Yeah, but at the same time, we're
teenager he
like, yeah,
turns into.
that's an owie,
Hmm.
but you're fine.
Yep.
It's you don't need to make a big deal
I
about it.
believe you. You're hurt. Let's kiss it better. Off we go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
And don't make a big deal of it.
that'll be the predominant way that he gets healthcare growing up.
I do fear that I'm going to be one of those nurse parents who's like, you're fine, shake it off. And then they have a broken arm or something. He's like walking on a broken foot for a week, knowing he's your son. I shouldn't say he's your son. It's both our sons. We were both fairly accident prone as kids.
Yeah.
We got a lot of stitches and casts and things.
Hmm.
Yeah. All right. What else can you think of to talk about living as a nurse? We talk about things in anatomical terms. That's definitely true.
Well, you do.
I do. I'm the science nerd
I
here.
have no brain capacity for names.
I
So Julia will list off. She'll go to the get a massage, and she'll come back and be like, "Oh yeah, they were really worked this blah 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 blah."
my
And
sternocleidoll mastoid.
yeah, and to me it literally sounds like Charlie Brown's parents. It's like wah 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 wah, and I'm just like, I have no idea. I
You
if
went to nursing school too.
Yeah, but see, okay, and I think this is where we differ on this. If I need to know the information, I know where I can look it up. Meanwhile, you like to know the information.
I do. I'm such a science nerd.
Right? I'm like, I have no capacity. I would rather memorize specs for my latest TV or the mics that we have.
Dave's a techie, just so you
I
know.
would rather save my brain cells for that. And I know where I can look my medical terms up and my procedures up when I need them.
All right. Yes, that is something that we definitely
Yeah.
differ on.
It's not like if I'm going into a code, I'm like, okay, let me review my CPR before I do a code. there are things that obviously you just instinctually know because you've done them so often.
Mhm.
But for things that you don't use on a regular basis, I won't memorize them.
Mm,
But yeah, Julia is very much the science nerd in the house,
I
and
definitely am.
she just brings terms up in normal conversation
I do.
because she's such a dork.
Such a it's so true. I can't even deny it. I can't even pretend to act offended by that. It's so true.
No, you
Yeah.
like it. You like you I like that about you. You're such a dork about it. You take great pleasure in it.
I do sometimes. You're going to hear that come out in this podcast, but that's why there's a balance here. Like I said, I'll bring the research and Dave will bring the opinions.
Yeah.
Okay, another thing that people should know about living life with a nurse.
Hmm.
We have twisted senses of humor.
Oh, nurses are dark.
Some very
We're
dark.
not the darkest out there,
No.
but nurses have a pretty warped sense of humor, and after 10, 15 years, it's pretty much your only sense of humor, and it comes out in really inappropriate
Inappropriate.
situations.
Yes. So eh, I have an example of that actually that I am somewhat embarrassed to tell, but I'm going to tell anyways because hopefully it'll make somebody else laugh too. Because this is just an example of the things that go on in a nurse's head that shouldn't come out, and sometimes they do. So we had a patient who I was discharging him later that shift, and I was just going in and chatting with him and his wife about a few things that we needed to cover in terms of discharge teaching. And he was just, he's a fairly new diagnosis, just started treatment. And he was, showing me some pictures of a bunch of, he had taken up soapstone carving. He was recently retired. And he's like, yeah, I didn't know what I was going to do with all this free time that I have. So I had taken up carving as he was showing me all these pictures. And without skipping a beat, without even thinking about what I was saying, as he's telling me about, I didn't know what to do, I needed to pick up new hobbies, I said with my outside voice, I feel like cancer was a bad choice and you could have done better.
See, even me, a cancer nurse, I look at that and I'm like, holy shit! Like,
Good thing I had a really
wow.
great rapport with this man and his wife. Like they also had very twisted senses of humor because they both just burst out laughing, which was like thank God for me because I
Mhm.
was dying inside. I was like, did I just say that with my
Yeah.
outside voice? You should never say that with your outside voice,
But you would
Julia.
really, you could, you, not necessarily this story, but you would relate a story like that to friends and family who aren't in nursing,
Yeah.
and they'd be like, "Wow, that was,
You are a terrible
yeah, a
human being.
terrible human
How
being."
could you say that to
Yeah,
someone who's suffering or whatever? Well, you got to read the room and also you got to have a filter sometimes, Julia. Luckily for me in this case, it happened to be the appropriate circumstance and it was like well received and like you got to have a sense of humor to cope with these things, which I think you do, but sometimes it should not be as dark as
yeah.
that. So that's an example of the sense
Which
of
is
humor
why
that you develop
it's
in nursing.
good to have married another nurse.
Because
To
you
go back to
can,
that,
because you can joke about these things at home and no one judges you because we still understand that we're caring, compassionate human beings that would do anything for our patients.
mhm. And when you make a joke like that, you actually understand the subtext of it, and it makes it funnier.
Yes.
So it's
So,
good.
yeah,
So
that
marry yourself a nurse.
marry yourself a nurse or someone else with a really dark sense of humor,
Yeah,
I guess. EHS, doctor, cop, something of the sort.
yeah.
Okay. All right. What's our timestamp here?
Oh, we're good.
Yeah.
Yep, 40
Okay.
minutes.
Okay. Well, maybe we should end with one last nursing
All right.
stereotype. The sexy nurse.
Yeah, sure are.
Is it true that nurses are always sexy though? I mean,
I feel like as a male nurse in a female dominated industry,
careful what you
I'm not
say.
gonna say anything about
That's good.
this. You go right ahead.
I'm gonna say,
I will say I married a sexy nurse,
there you go.
and that's all I'm gonna say.
I think that stereotype that nurses are like rawr all the time. It just, let's be honest, nurses are tired when they come home from
Yeah.
work. Like all the stuff you see about, doctors and nurses shacking up at work and stuff. Like I'm sure that happens in some places, probably mostly emerge departments. If there are emerge nurses listening, I'm sorry.
Or
Um,
let us know if it's true.
or let us know. Yeah, there you go. But in all honesty, like we work hard, we come home, we're like,
I
you're,
mean, we
you're,
spend our life in PJs, whether we're at work in scrubs
yeah,
or especially in the pandemic, like where we're just wearing like hospital scrubs. We're not people aren't even wearing like their really nice like Grey's Anatomy
or like
scrubs and
Janu
fitted scrubs and
scrubs. Yeah.
whatnot, right? and then they come home and you're working night shifts or like shift work, so
And you're dead tired.
you're putting on
Comfy clothes.
PJs or sweats and stuff. Like
You
we
literally live your
live
life in
in.
essentially
So
PJs.
I mean, if you find that sexy, that's great.
Yeah, there you go. But just,
But
if you're
is anybody sexy at 6 in the morning after you've been up for 12 hours and been dealing with bedpans and catheters all night
and
long?
deaths and I don't know. Anyways, just to, for people who might be dating a nurse right now, who might need to adjust their expectations.
Yeah.
I think I married a sexy nurse.
Well, that's nice of you to say.
No, of course. And maybe that's a good place to wrap up before we
Okay.
get ourselves into trouble.
So you can. We don't have an outro yet, so I
Not
just gonna
yet.
let you
We're
know you
working
can
on
find
it.
us on socials now. We have an Instagram page, the 24G Podcast. We're on YouTube. We make our
YouTube.
podcast into just videos with picture, which makes it easy to find us. Is at the 24G Podcast as well. On Spotify, the 24G Podcast,
All
and
right. Apple
Apple and
Music.
Google. I think I haven't verified that they're live yet, but they are there. And you can also get us at the 24G podcast.gmail. So that's really easy. 24G podcast from pretty much everything
At Gmail.
at gmail.com.
Yep. If you have
Or,
questions, comments, feedback, drink suggestions,
yeah.
want to tell us off for saying something offensive, we're sorry if we do.
Or if you want to be extra cool, you can go on to anchor.fm/24G, which is our landing page for our podcast
Are you
host.
putting that in the podcast?
Yeah,
Like
this will
show
be in the
notes?
notes.
Okay.
But there you can actually leave like a voicemail message or other messages if you want, and just drop us a line.
Oh, fun. All of our 3 to 5 followers.
Yeah, that we
Somebody
know
could...
and have our actual phone numbers.
They could leave us a voicemail on our random landing page for podcast launching.
This is for in a year from now when we have like 10 or 12 listeners.
Ooh, maybe somebody that we don't know has started following us.
You'll have made it when you're like, I don't know who these people are.
I don't know who you are.
Yeah.
Thank you to all of our friends and family who have started listening thus far.
Yeah, with good feedback and stuff.
Yes, we appreciate you.
So
big hearts. Making a finger heart for you right now.
There you go.
All right. Well, I think that's a wrap.
Yeah.
We will see you guys next time on the 24 Gauge Podcast.
See ya.
Bye.